Welcome to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't, a podcast dedicated to helping you create the relationship you truly want.
Navigating divorce with mediation. Save time, money, and heartache. Divorce doesn't have to be a battlefield, but is mediation really the peaceful path it's promised to be? In this episode, we explore the growing popularity of divorce mediation, why so many couples are turning to it, what it can save you emotionally and financially, and when it might backfire. From power imbalances to hidden agendas, we'll unpack the pros and cons of sitting down at the table instead of standing before a judge. Whether you're considering mediation, in the middle of it, or helping others navigate it, this conversation pulls back the curtain on what works and what doesn't, when love ends and legal agreements begin. Let's define divorce mediation. Mediation is a collaborative process that allows individuals to control the outcome. The mediator is a neutral, third-party professional who keeps spouses focused on the goal of a fair outcome, not battling over past resentments. The mediator does not need to have a law background. In my mind, mediation requires exchanging anger and grudges for the values of fairness and reducing expenses. I'm going to say that again because it's important. Exchanging anger and grudges for the values of fairness and reducing expenses. Fighting with lawyers to extract payback for the past really ends up with the ugliness spilling over on everyone, most importantly, the children, if there are any. If kids watch a process of respect and fairness between their parents, they are less likely to hide their true feelings. Over the years, one of the things that bothered me the most was witnessing parents who really want the kids to take their side and help punish the other parent. Separating feelings about them as a spouse from recognizing that as a parent, they may just do things differently, but that doesn't necessarily make them a bad parent. Punishment aimed at a spouse is not in anyone's best interest. Mediation can help you restore your equilibrium and recognize that having control over the kids and what happens is not always what's best for the kids. Kids need two parents, because two parents offer a range of ideas and ways to think about what's important. And I believe the more range, the better your choices are going to be. Court battles offer a lot of emotional wear and tear on couples. By working with a neutral third-party mediator, couples are more likely to craft personalized agreements that reflect their unique circumstances and shared history. Fewer dollars spent on legal fees allows couples to redirect their financial resources towards rebuilding their lives and co-parenting, or even paying for therapy to support the transition. For mediation to work well, both parties have to feel empowered. There actually can be greater satisfaction because decisions are not in the hands of a judge. However, mediation is not a solution for every couple. Mediation is not going to work when there's a history of abuse or coercion. Another problem situation can be if one partner is hiding assets or unwilling to be honest. Then mediation can be ineffective because there is no legal leverage. My guest today, to help us explore the pros and cons of mediation, is Joe Dillon. He was a child of divorce himself who has spent over 17 years helping couples transition with a focus on preserving dignity and ensuring financial stability. He approaches divorce as an opportunity for couples to make thoughtful, forward-looking decisions. Joe led the way in creating virtual divorce mediation back in 2011 common long before it became common practice. This approach has made mediation more accessible and effective. He also is actively involved in training the next generation of mediators. Welcome. So glad to have you here today.
Thanks for having me. And I'm not sure who you were talking about in that intro. That guy sounds pretty good.
So,
Yeah.
my first question to you as a divorce mediator is, what do you consider your role as a mediator, guide, referee, or something else? And part two, what are your goals in the role that you play in divorce mediation?
Yeah, good question. I kind of view myself as a guide, right? A facilitator. My job is to help couples do a couple of things, right? One, it's to give them a safe space to have some difficult conversations, right? Divorce is a conflict, right? These two people, or usually it's one person driving the process. One person does not want to be married anymore, so the other one might want to be married, and therefore it's a conflict. So we help them have that safe space that they can have these difficult conversations. Then, kind of like a Sherpa would, I guide them through a process, right? Because most of the clients we work with have not been divorced before. And you don't know what you don't know, right? And so at the end of the day, we try to say, okay, here are the things we need to talk about. Here's the order we need to talk about them in. Here are the questions you need to ponder. Here are the answers I'm going to try to elicit from you. And also present a lot of options, right? Because we don't want to ever tell people what to do. We want to give them frameworks and guidance and information and things like that. And so really it's kind of more as a guide. I sometimes can be a referee, but with a referee, you're kind of using a set of rules to judge who's right or wrong. And really, when I think referee, I just think more like kind of like the boxing referee that separates the two guys who are like hanging on to each other, right? In that kind of sense, Rhoda.
Yeah, that's
So that's
right.
kind of more like it. It's where I'm just trying to keep the parties in their neutral corners, keep them productive, and keep them engaged in the process. And so, that's kind of it, really, what I would say.
So it makes me think about the person who wants the divorce the least. I would suspect has the least power, because the person who wants it more is, I don't know, that just kind of, I don't know, is that true?
It's funny. I would think they have more power, and here's why.
Okay.
Because it only takes one person to get a divorce, right? You and me, we could go down to the courthouse, we could file a piece of paper, some sheriff's deputy shows up at a door and knock, knock, hi, you've been served, right? So the power, when you're married, it takes two people to be married, right? But with this person, we call them the reluctant spouse, right? That's our internal name for this individual. And the reluctant spouse actually, in my opinion, has more power because they get to choose the method that they get a divorce, right? They can choose to mediate versus having litigation hoisted upon them, right?
Yeah.
They can choose to save money because, mediation is a fraction of what it would cost to hire attorneys, and go through a divorce. And I think what I also see is the person driving the divorce tends to be far more accommodating to the reluctant spouse because they know that that person's presence is somewhat tenuous. And it's not that they're giving away the farm. I want to be really clear about
Yeah,
that, right?
right.
Right. It's not, they're not doing that, but they understand how difficult it was to get this person here and get them in the room and get them in the space. And so they tend to be very cooperative and very, collaborative, and they want to get the best outcome. And I really see that as a big positive. So I would say if someone's listening out there and they're reluctant to get a divorce, mediation gives you far more control over the process than if you went, say, the attorney or litigation route.
That's really interesting. I'm glad I
Yeah.
asked that. How can mediation empower couples to regain control over their circumstances and avoid the pitfalls of leaving these critical decisions, which we started talking about, but I'd like to hear a little more?
Yeah, I'll give you a perfect example from my own life, right? So my parents litigated their divorce. This is back in the 80s. And I remember being in our living room. I was living with my mom at the time. I think my dad had moved out. And I remember my mom being really upset. And I kid you not, what I'm about to tell you, right, is that I remember this like clear as day. And she says, "Oh man, I hope we get a good judge." And I'm like, I was like 14 at the time. I'm like, what does that mean? She's like, "Well, we have to get a judge that likes kids so that they'll give us some good child support, that they'll give us some good money." as opposed to what, a judge who doesn't like kids and you're going to get less child support. And the truth of the matter is that was the answer back in the 80s. The judges, it was just arbitrary. So we got a judge, and I kid you not, his name was Judge Friend, which was perfect. And Judge Friend did me and my mom right, and we got good child support and alimony and all that stuff, right? But imagine you're this woman now, my mom, who had just re-entered the workforce, having worked inside the home with me, raising me up until about age 11, working part-time at a jewelry store, and my dad making 10 times more than she is. And she's thinking, I have to rely on a stranger who I have like basically 30 seconds to convince that my kid is not a delinquent and deserves some money, and this person is going to be the arbiter of what I get, right? How scary is that, right? It's completely out of your control. In mediation, all decisions are in your control. Certainly what we say, we mediate in the shadow of the law, right? Because statutes and guidelines exist. But couples have the power to decide what they think is fair, because it's not like you see on TV where, somebody bursts in through the courtroom doors and the judge is like, oh, yes, you're the person I've been waiting for because of what you said. I rule in favor of the plaintiff, like it's not what this happens, right? So mediation gives you the complete control over the outcome.
How do you help couples reduce conflict and focus on making decisions together instead? What are practical strategies that families can use to approach conflict and decision-making in a way that feels manageable and constructive, even when things are emotionally charged?
Yeah, so one of the things, as you probably know, my background is in finance and negotiation. And one of the things that we do as part of our process is, it's commonly referred to as discovery, right? It's all the documents, all the forms, and all the stuff you have to gather up to go through this process. Well, I have access to your, bank account balances and your retirement savings. Like I know all of this information. I have to, right? In order to help you negotiate your divorce. One of the most powerful things I can say to people is I'll open up their bank statement or whatever it is, and I'll go, hey, you guys, you have $1,200 in your checking. The average attorney retainer is between $5,000 and $7,500 per person. All I know right now is that you've paid me for my services, right? And you can't afford a lawyer. So why don't we get it done here, right? That works about 75% of the time, right?
I bet it does. Yeah.
Who wants to, if you're going to get a better result and spend less on it, why wouldn't you do that, right? But all kidding aside, a lot of it also is conflict, right? We all, whether it's the neighbor's barking dog or whatever it is, right? There's always some sort of conflict in our life. And when we're mired in it and we're in the middle of it, right? Your blood pressure goes up, you get those feelings, that catabolic energy, right? It's like, And so you ask people like, hey, think about how you feel right now. Are you feeling good? Are you happy? Are you feeling like you're sitting on a beach in Hawaii? Or are you at this place where you're like at your wit's end, I can't stand this. It's usually the latter. And I say, okay, do you want to carry this feeling on for the next 2 to 3 years? Because that's how long an attorney-driven divorce will take. Or do you want to finish it in mediation, which takes 2 to 3 months, right? Would you rather rip the Band-Aid off, get through the process, and, based on what we both do, begin the healing process, right? There's a lot of work in rebuilding that's going to have to happen once this is over, even for the person who wanted the divorce, right? Nobody goes into marriage, right, getting a divorce, right? They're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to get married, and probably in 7 years I'll get divorced, whatever, right? So you've got to think like that. You've got to be thinking about your financial resources. You're going to save for your own future instead of your attorney's future. You're going to save for your kids, put them through college. You're going to be able to get through this feeling that you've got this ick, right? This terrible, sad, feeling that's hovering over you a lot faster and rebuild, right? So those are the 2 points I usually emphasize to people because, again, we all have choices in life, and I'm not going to force you, right, to mediate, but I'm hoping you'll see that those 2 reasons are reason enough that you should stay through the process, and 98% of our clients typically do. Every so often somebody will be like, I'm off to the races.
I really like that because I think when you are in a divorce situation, you haven't figured out how to be a team and how to work together. But
Right.
maybe in parting, because of finances and children as an audience, you're a
Hmm.
little more invested and okay, we're doing this. Let's make it get it done.
Exactly. Yeah. And I want to be perfectly clear, right? Some of my best friends are attorneys and I tease them mercilessly about this. But is a general rule, attorneys on the likability scale are probably, down towards the tax collector and, those kinds of folks, right? The poor people who do these important jobs. And so it's sort of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, And so if you can unite people against the system, and again, like I've said, a lot of my colleagues and attorney colleagues are like, man, it's not, I'm a nice person. I'm just trying to deal with the system that's been dealt me to me, and I totally get that. But then you can say, look, fight the system by mediating, right? Resolve it here, confidential, on your own terms. You're empowered to make decisions, and people are like, yeah, let's do that, right? And if you can at least get them to recognize that one thing they have in common, we can get them there.
Yeah, since mediation requires that both parties feel free to speak and not afraid of repercussions, what do you do if you believe that one may not be happening with a couple? How do you address this problem if one person is more dominant, which may have been the problem to begin with?
Yeah. So we do it a couple of ways. First, we do it right off the bat in our agreement to mediate. So we have couples sign a contract with us, and one of the clauses is a confidentiality clause, and another one is a threats and inappropriate behaviors clause. And I say to them, look, you don't have to like me, but my house, my rules, right? And if you don't like it, here it all is in black and white. You're acknowledging it, you're signing it. Can't say I didn't warn you, right? So we first off, we have the kind of bubble of confidentiality to basically say, look, this is a confidential space. You are not to take this to your friends and your family and your neighbor and the checkout cashier and all that stuff, right? This stays here. Of course, for professionals, yes, you talk to your lawyer, talk to your accountant, talk to your therapist, right? 100%. But we want you to feel safe to be able to say those things that are on your mind. So that's one. Number two is the threats and inappropriate behavior. I have a laundry list of things that, under normal circumstances, I'm a former ice hockey player, and the things we say to each other out on the ice or the behaviors we engage in when we knock somebody down or whack them with a stick, right? That's perfectly acceptable in that forum, but not in my forum, right? And so it's about respectful communication. I will cut you off. I will shut this down. I will end a session. I might even terminate you. And people are really surprised. They're like, well, we paid you. It's like, yeah, you did. But you also acknowledge that you're not going to be a jerk about it and scream and yell at me and the other person. And if you do, I reserve the right to shut this down. And I actually have fired 2 clients in my history. Only 2, but and they were that right, but they were shocked. How could you do this? And I'm going to get a lawyer. I'm like, knock yourself out. Read section whatever of the agreement, right? And they went away, not quietly, but they went away. And so that's part of the process. They say, look, if you want to scream and yell, go litigate. Stand in a courtroom. Knock yourself out. But this is not why I'm here. I make my role very clear. I give them that safe space. And when it comes to the person who might not be heard all the time, it's not easy if you're untrained, right? But as practitioners, as professionals like you and I are, you know the signs. You can see who answers, who cuts off, who talks louder, who talks faster, right? And so what the techniques, of course, are slow it down, lower your voice, lean in, right, to the person who is perhaps a little more in their shell. And the other person keeps going and going and going. And if, let's say, it's party, Bob and Sue are my fictitious client names, and say Bob is really quiet and Sue just, starts talking, or Bob just starts talking, I'll lean into the other one and say, no, go ahead. I'm listening to you. Don't worry. Please continue, right? And so I'm not telling the other person to stop talking, but I'm modeling that that's inappropriate behavior, right? And that's what we want to do because everyone will get a turn. I'm a neutral third party, enough of me to go around, right? So that's it. And then you bring that space down, quiet, take breaks as we need. And I always encourage people, our sessions are 2 hours. That's a long time to sit in this, right? I'm like, listen, if you need a break every 15 minutes to take a five and just walk around the block or get a cup of coffee, or if you smoke, if you got them, whatever, do what you need to do to preserve your ability to be here, right? So we have those are just a couple of the things. There's a lot of those mechanisms. I'm sure you know in your world as well. Oh yeah. Oh no. That's right. These are good donuts, come on. Oh. Yeah, yeah. I'd say let's start with parenting, right? So parenting is the more difficult of the one. As a child of divorce myself, my parents had such a high conflict divorce that when my parents, their divorce was over, the last time I saw my dad was in the hallway of a courtroom in New Jersey. And that was it. Never saw him again. And then in 2019, got a letter he died. That was it, right? So that was a span of about, well, I don't know, 35 years, something like that. And so I always remind people, right? I say, listen, if you don't think it can happen to you, look at my face, right? This is not a guilt trip. This is not a story I'm making up. This is actually what happened to me. And if you're not careful, it's exactly what will happen to you, right? Everybody's like, nah, da, da, ba, ba. It's not going to happen to us. We're going to be fine, la, la. And so that's one powerful way to do it. Another way we try to remind them is, look, your marital status doesn't change your parental status, right? You might not be husband and wife, but you're still mom and dad. You brought these children into the world. They are relying squarely on you, whether they appreciate it or not, those little boogers, right? They're relying on you to care for them, to guide them, to feed them. They want both of you in the stands at their graduation. That's something I didn't have on the sideline of the soccer game, at your wedding, right? All those things. They don't want to be looking across the room and, oh, mom's sitting over there in that corner and dad's out in the hallway. That's unfair to them, right? And so if you keep reminding them that you guys are the adults, we need to put the kids first. I think a lot of that stuff sinks in. And at the end of the day, we try to emphasize, and thankfully, here's a little fun fact that I've been tracking over my many years at mediation. When I first started mediating, the 50-50 parenting plans were rare, right? About 10% of our clients were 50-50. And really, mom was the majority, primary custodial parent, whatever, your state
That's
calls
right.
it.
Yeah.
Now about 85% of our clients are 50-50, which is awesome, right? Because you want all-in parenting. Both parents play important roles. I got stuff from my dad that I didn't get from my mom and vice versa. My mom did an awesome job raising me as a single parent, right? But there's still conversations that boys want to have about certain birds and bees and things, right? That might not go well with mom. The mom was a real trooper. I got to give her A plus right there, mom. But those are the kinds of things you remind people, right? When it comes to the finances, my background, as I mentioned, right, negotiation, finance, and I like to say to people, numbers don't lie. And so part of our process, we have a lot of proprietary stuff that we do that helps with that case resolution rate of ours. And one of them is this thorough budgeting process. We have them do a joint budget that represents the previous 12 months of their lives as a married couple. What's your household look like? 100 different categories. Insanity. They totally hate me for it, but whatever. Then we have them do the same budget as separate people for the next 12 to 24 months moving forward, what it's going to cost for you and your kids when you're living on your own,
That's great.
right? And we show them because one parent is usually the household manager. I've heard it called the household CEO, the bank, whatever you want to call it. In our house, that happens to be my wife, Cheryl. So if you said to me, Joe, what do you guys spend on groceries or your mortgage or your water bill? I'd be like, I have an MBA in finance and I still don't know. Go ask Cheryl, right? And so these budgets, a lot of times what they reveal is just how much money couples will spend on kids. And usually one parent's like, we're spending how much on karate? Yeah, it's $500 a month and dance is 700 and gymnastics is 1200. I never knew that. okay, now you do, right? And so I get to be the neutral, right? Because I didn't know it either. And at the end of the day, you say to them, look, you think it's a good idea. They enjoy gymnastics, they enjoy karate, they enjoy eating, you know? And so, yeah, well, here's what it costs. Here's what the child support guidelines spit out. Guess what? It's not enough. Now what? You want to be the one to tell them they can't do dance lessons anymore? Or are we going to work on a way to figure out how to pay for this? And 99 times out of 100, it's the we'll work out a way to pay for it, right?
Yeah, yeah, and
Numbers,
you're putting the financial priority about the kid, and also about what it's going to take for each of them to live in a separate place.
right?
And that's I think people often, part of what you're describing is a bigger picture, a perspective that I think when you're in the middle of your emotions and misery and this is happening and this is horrible, that it's really hard to see that bigger picture. And I,
Yes.
even in your introduction, I like that forward thinking
Right.
that we mentioned. I thought that was really important.
Yeah, and if you put the data in front of them, right? Like it's funny, right? When you look at these numbers and you don't want to underestimate the emotional toll this takes, right? But let's be honest here. When you think about the four big buckets, right? That's what we call them, the topics: parenting, child support, alimony, property division. Three of those are financial in nature,
That's
right?
right.
And guess what? In states like California, Illinois, New Jersey, these states use parenting time as one of the two main inputs into calculating child support. They use a model called the income shares model, income of the parties, time sharing with each of you. So now you have the parenting plan as an input into child support. So I'm going to call it three and a half of the four are financial in nature, right? When you tell people that, they're like, I didn't, well, yeah, that makes sense. And I'm like, okay, so let's look at the data. Let's look at what the numbers are telling us. And like you said, right, Rhoda, it's numbers. When you look at the apart budgets, invariably they add up to at least 10, 15, maybe even 20% more because two housing payments, two internet bills, two Netflix subscriptions. You lose the multi-car discount on your car insurance, right? Everybody's car price goes up, right? So all of those things, and people are like, wow, I'm like, that's the cost of divorce. And that's okay. We have to plan for it. But now when it comes to things like child support and the dreaded alimony, you look at someone's income, you look at someone's expenses, and you say, well, how do you expect the father of your child or the mother of your child to make ends meet? Because you don't want them living, down by the river in a van, to quote Chris Farley from Saturday Night Live, while you're in your, 5 bedroom, 3.5 lake house, whatever, right? And it's like, you think the kid's gonna want to go to parenting time in the van? No, right? We need to create a seamless experience for those kids as they move from house to house, and alimony and child support is the way we do that.
I like that. Do you
Yeah.
find that people often use mediation as a space to process emotions, not just deal with logistics? I was curious about that.
Yeah, absolutely, right?
Yeah.
There are people who do. I always start by saying we have a strategy session. That's before we even start mediating. We have this 1 hour strategy session where we set the tone. We talk about what we're going to talk about. What are the big issues? What order we want to tackle them in? What do I need from you to do that? And so it's a whole process that we take people through. And during that, I explain my role, and I have these slides that I put up. And I have one of them is the difference between mediation and counseling, because they are two sides of the same coin. And we have a saying, and feel free to quote me on this because I love it. It's mediation is therapeutic, but it's not therapy,
Oh,
right?
yes, that's right.
Right. And
Yes.
so, and I always say to people, I'm like, listen, there are people who go to school for decades and spend their life as trained mental health professionals. I am not one of those people. You do not want me as your therapist, right? I'm a nice guy. I'll listen. I'll pat you on the back. I'll hand you a tissue. But so we try to explain to them, like, look, we get it, you're hurting, but we're here to move forward. And in fact, I encourage clients to do at least one of two things. One, continue to go to counseling, whether as an individual or a couple, because guess what, guys? you're no longer going to be trying to fix your marriage. You're now going to try to figure out how to be co-parents, right? So that's a whole new role that you don't know how to be. Divorced co-parents. Go talk to a professional, right? That's awesome. If nothing else, also on staff, I'm teasing because my wife Cheryl is a divorce coach and she works with me here at Equitable Mediation. And so we also offer emotional support to people. And we say, look, when you work with me, it's always 1-on-2. I'm the financial guy. I'm the tactical guy. I'm a nice guy, but I'm the document drafter. I'm that guy, right? The rules and regulations guy. Cheryl, on the other hand, is the emotional support. She's the softer one. She's always 1-on-1. You can process your emotions with her, clear out that mental clutter, come into session fresh with some strategies, with some sense of calm. And it helps me a lot, I'll tell you that. And it helps people too in terms of rebuilding their lives and moving forward. So we take that sort of 1-2 approach where we absolutely know emotions drive divorce, right? It's not money. People think it's money. It's not. We never went to my family's on Thanksgiving. That's what drives the alimony conversation.
That's true. Yes, I'm sure. So one of the things that I would bump into with couples and was that particularly it was often a woman who'd be really concerned about, okay, Pennsylvania's pretty much 50-50. I don't trust that he's going to be a good enough parent for that 50% of the time. And one of the things I would say, which I found to be true many, many times, is that when fathers had their own time to decide what they were going to do, instead of being told sometimes how they should be with the kids, that they really improved as fathers. And because they didn't have micromanagement going on, and they filled that space and they got to think about it for themselves. So I would be very reassuring that I'm telling you, it's amazing to me how many men step into that role with more energy and vigor.
Absolutely, yeah. And right, kids are not as fragile as we think they are.
Yeah,
right?
no, I've had people bring kids into me because they're getting a divorce. I remember this one kid. I just was so impressed with who they were and how they thought it was a better thing. There'd be less noise in the house, and I walked the kid out, and I said, I'm just going to be honest with you. I'd be happy to have them back at any point in the future, but I think this person is handling things.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of relief cooking here. And I know that might be hard because that's not how you're feeling. But
right.
I feel free to come back, but let's give a little space, and because therapy doesn't work well if somebody's not interested. And that can be tough. Yeah.
Mediation's the same way. And to your point, right? It's with kids, you have to understand, right? There's a certain baseline, right? We have to feed them and clothe them and shelter them and educate them, right? So they don't grow up to be a pack of rabid wolves, right? But at the end of the day, if you're making organic salad and I'm making store-bought salad, and I'm eating fast food on Friday nights and you never do, you just have to realize that you have different parenting styles. And guess what? That actually makes, in my opinion, for a richer tapestry. It gives kids different perspectives, and then along the lines, helps them understand that there are different ways in the world. There isn't right or wrong. I have decisions I need to make,
One of the things I would say to couples is I think the world is going to be a far more difficult place for your kids, not because of divorce, but what divorce is going to help them with is dealing with reality in a complicated situation. Right. They have 2 homes, they have 2 bedrooms, they have. And that complicatedness it's just something that helps prepare them for a very, very complicated world. And I believe that. I mean, I'm not talking about a 3-year-old, but I do
Make
think
your own dinner, kid.
And I agree with you. I think it's really important that parents, they may not respect, and that's what I like about, I always say respect is more important than love. You don't have to respect that your spouse is feeding them pizza every Friday night. You don't have to you don't have to like it, but you do have to make room for it, because you're exactly right. It's a richer tapestry, or it's a bigger continuum of a way to live in the world. And it helps prepare you for choices. And I think that's really, really super important. So what happens when one or both partners, and maybe you've already talked about this, but I don't think we landed on it, aren't really ready to let go of the relationship?
Yeah, so we've followed. There's a law firm in the UK that does a study, and they do a lot of research. And one of the studies that I like that they do is they asked their clients who came in to see them for divorce, how long have you been thinking about divorce? And their study showed that the person who entered their office and said, I'm ready to move forward with divorce, had been thinking about it for 2 years and 1 month. So
I would have
25
guessed 3
months.
years.
So there you go, right?
I'm glad for the
Yep.
information. Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course that's an average, right? Because there's just it was a news blurb that they put up on their PR website. But at the end of the day, you say to yourself, well, gee, let's say round numbers 2 years. That means one party is 2 years ahead of the other one. And while the other person probably has an inkling, they're not there yet. And so I liken it to, you're on a platform with a train, and your train pulls up to the station and the doors open. Both of you know you're going to wherever, Chicago or New York or whatever. And one of you gets on the train and the other one's on the platform. And it's like, well, guess what? This train is leaving for Chicago. You need to get on it. That person really might not want to go, or they might be the person who says, wait, hold the door, right? Those kinds of things. So we in our space, prior to them ever becoming mediation clients, we have a number of intake questions that we ask, and a couple of things that we do. So one, we have a screening call, right? So the one person, usually the driver of the divorce, of course, is going to schedule a call with my partner, Cheryl, and it's a free call. And she asks some questions and they ask some questions. And she's like, listen, this is a voluntary process. Is your spouse willing to proceed with divorce? If so, I'm going to send you some resources. I want you to share them with them. Next, we have an intake form that says, basically, have you done everything you can think of, or you think you were willing to do to save the marriage, yes or no? So I see that before I meet with them, our initial meeting, right? Then we ask, look, is there any opportunity for this relationship to be saved? And I ask it knowing the answer to the question most likely is no. Because if one person says to me, well, we could continue to go to counseling and we could do X, Y, and Z. So I'll look at the other person, usually the person who schedules the meeting, and I'll say, Bob, Sue, what do you think? Is there anything left to do that you think you could save the marriage? And that gives them the confidence at that moment, typically say, no, I'm ready to move forward. And then I turn to the other person and I say, well, listen, Bob, Sue, I'm so sorry, but I'm not here to tell you to get a divorce. This is voluntary to be here. But it kind of sounds like Bob or Sue is ready to move forward. And so now you have a choice. This is like we were talking about, right? They can choose, you can both choose to be here voluntarily and mediate, control your future, control your outcome, save a lot of time, money, and stress. Or, and I'll turn to the other person, how far are you willing to go there? And they'll say, I'm willing to hire a lawyer and start this process this week. Say, well, you really want to get a knock on the door from some process server, and while you're watching Netflix with your kids, it says, here you go. And I'm always like, totally your call. I support you no matter what you do, right? Your choice. But by couching it that way and sharing with them that it's perfectly normal for the other person to be ahead of them, for them to drive it, ask the other person who's driving it, is there anything to be saved here? And when they say no, basically 99 times out of 100, really 99.9 out of 100, it sort of is the final kind of, kind of right there it is in black and white in front of the person with this neutral third party that, yeah, I think it's time to move forward. And it's hard because I'd say probably about half of the people we meet with don't become our clients. And so that's probably telling me that the reluctant spouse dug in and the other person had no choice but to get a lawyer, which really is a shame. So,
Yeah, I
but it
agree.
is what it is, yeah.
What's the biggest myth or misunderstanding people have about mediation?
Oh boy, that's a great question, and I this is my bugaboo. It's that I'm going to tell you what you're entitled to. And I use the word entitled because people love to throw that word around. I was on the Google machine on the interwebs and I found out that I'm entitled to $1 million a week in alimony, because it said so on this website called, stickittoyourx.com, right? And you're like, oh, okay. That's great that, your spouse works in a call center and makes $65,000 a year, but okay, let's get through this, right? They think that for some reason, in mediation, that if I tell you my story and I try to paint a picture of what a terrible human being my soon to be ex is, you're going to side with me, you're going to take my side, and you're going to give me all this stuff. And at the end of the day, I'm a neutral third party. I don't make decisions. I empower you guys to make decisions. I provide that forum, the information, the process. And I also reality check you. And I say, look, you can talk to your friend Chat GPT or Claude or whatever your AI friend buddy is, or go on your interwebs. But at the end of the day, it's got to be realistic for both parties, because if it's not, and one person gets out of here with a settlement that's lopsided, A, I didn't do my job and shame on me. But guess what? That other person in the quiet of night outside of the session when they're drinking their tea and they're reading their book before bed is going to go, the heck with this. I'm getting a lawyer. I'm not sticking with this, right? So it's going to blow up. So that would be the thing, is that I'm not going to tell you what you're entitled to, and I'm not going to try to stick it to your ex just because you don't like them. I have no horse in this race, right? So that's probably the biggest thing.
What should my audience look for to know that a mediation session has been successful?
Wow, that's a great question.
Because I have had people come back and they felt like, I don't know, I don't think this is helping, and you're so kind of clear cut that I really think this is an important thing.
No, no, not at all. It's a great question because I explain to people up front. I'm a big fan of graphics. Like, I'm a visual guy, right? So I'm one of those people that you could tell me something 100 times, poof, gone, right? But if you show it to me once, got it, right? I'm just a visual learner. And so I put a slide up on the screen and I show them the process of what we're going to go through. And I say, I share this with you, not because it's a very pretty picture that I made with lots of neat colors and arrows and things. I explain there's two things I want to tell you. One, divorce is a frustrating process. It is a 2 steps forward, 1 step back process. So you got to promise me you're going to hang in there with me. And two, you reserve the right to change your mind. This is like, this goes back to, like, you've seen all those movies, right, where somebody the good guy gets held hostage by the bad guys. They got him or her tied to the chair, in that warehouse where it's always raining inside the warehouse. Can't you guys fix the roof? Like, really, could we not work on this? The single light over them, and they're like, you're going to tell us what we want to know now. That's how mediation can feel sometimes, because I'm asking you to basically decide on major agreements that are going to impact the rest of your life. Oh, no pressure, right? So by giving them a warning up front, I say to them, look, it's going to be like, oh my God, are we getting anywhere? Are we doing anything? Again, going back to my ice hockey days, I reference it. I go, think about the shape of an ice hockey stick, or hockey stick in general, right? It's got a long flat handle. You put it on its side. And then if you put it right, the blade shoots up at a steep angle, right? Because it sticks off the end. That's what mediation is all about. Flat, 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 flat. Oh my God, we're done, right? And so that's how we explain it, because to your point, we need people to hang in there. We need you to stick with me. I promise we're going to get there. When you asked before about being a referee or, a coach or things like that, I would also say I am a cheerleader. And I know that sounds funny, but I'm there to encourage them to say, hey, you guys, and I'm going to let your audience in on a little secret that I don't usually share. But I always start with the parenting plan first, and here's why. I don't think in all my years of mediating, I've ever had a client couple be unable to agree on parenting. It may have been a knockdown, drag out, but we always got there. Child support, sometimes hard. Alimony, hard. Property, sure. But parenting. And so it's kind of insidious, but we say, hey, you guys, guess what? Look at you two agreeing. You really did something difficult. You put yourselves aside and you put your kids first. And good job, right? And I sound probably like a nut job, right? But you do that, and they're like, yeah, look at us
They
go.
sit up a little
They
more.
do,
Yeah.
right? And I am proud of them. And I say that to them. Hey, and I always finish a session by saying, look, you guys, I know it doesn't seem like it, but we made excellent progress. If I do have concerns about where we are, say, look, even though it seemed difficult, we still did make progress because guess what? Here's the thing. To get to decisions, you need to clear the gunk out, right? Like if you're moving, guess what? You got to go down in that basement and throw out all that junk that you've been sticking down there for the last 20 years, right? You can't move until you do. Mediation is the same way. We got to clear out some of that junk and that clutter before we can get to decision making. And so that's, I think they get a kick out of it, and kind of look at me with a little side eye because like he's a little enthusiastic, this guy, but I want to keep him out of court. I'll do anything I can to do that.
Yeah, I like that. If you could give one piece of advice to couples thinking about mediation that we haven't covered already, what would it be?
I'd say look for a mediator who has a process. Divorce can really get out of hand quick, right? All of us have had arguments with our friends, our spouses, our neighbors, and we're like, what are we yelling about, right? Because we just get embroiled in the battle and we forget what's going on. And if you have a mediator who doesn't control the space and control the process, the conversations can spiral pretty quickly. So if you're thinking about mediation or divorce in general, you need somebody who is structured and who is organized and who is going to, quite frankly, sometimes push back on you, right? Whether you hire a mediator or a lawyer, you want a lawyer who's not a yes woman or a yes man. You want somebody who says, listen, I can go and ask for that if you want, but in my experience, I haven't seen it. Or a mediator who says, certainly that's an option. But in my 28 years of mediating and 17 years in private practice, I've never seen anyone agree to that, but we can talk about it, right? So that's what I would say.
And I also think, and
Yeah,
I think that's true for therapists. I think if you have a therapist that's only
right.
empathizing and validating, you're not going to grow. You have to have those uncomfortable moments of reality.
That's where the growth is, right? The growth is
Yep.
in the hard spaces, right? The looking at yourself, questioning what you're doing. How did I get here? I had a hand in this divorce, right? And so having somebody who can not, by no means, we don't rush you through the process. It's just we have you on a track that we're gently,
Nudging.
somewhat firmly guiding you forward, right? Because we know what the alternative is. It's a disaster. It's years, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Why,
Yeah.
right?
Tell my audience where they can reach you or read more about what you offer.
Yeah, great. So the best place is our website, like our company name, Equitable Mediation. So be careful, it's not meditation. We do get a lot of weird spam for yoga retreats and things like that. Not sure why. But it's equitablemediation.com. And if you go on our website, one of the things in addition to doing, virtual mediation, we are probably one of the original divorce bloggers. We've been blogging for 17 years. We've had like 1 million people come to our website, which is insane. If they only knew, it's like, wow, I'm just writing these things because I want to share information. There's a learning center. If you get to our website, click on the learning center, you're going to find all kinds of courses, videos, podcasts, downloadable ebooks, right? Because again, like what I like to share, telling no tales here. For us, an educated client is a good client. If they have reasonable expectations, they understand the process, they know what they're getting into, that saves me a lot of time and heartache on my side. So resources, there's some paid courses, but most of it's free. We practice in Washington, California, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. So we also have state-specific divorce guides for those 6 states, right? And so absorb information. You don't have to be a pro, still hire a professional, right? You don't have to do this yourself, but at least come in with some realistic expectations. So that's the best way. And you can schedule that free call right there in the Talk to Us button. So lots of ways to get in touch. And we really want you to do that. Read, poke around, look at the resources, and reach out when you're ready.
Mediation isn't a magic wand, but it can be a tool for building a more respectful, cost-effective path through divorce, like any tool. It depends on how and when it's used. Stay informed, ask the hard questions, and don't be afraid to seek guidance, because every ending deserves a thoughtful approach. Thanks for listening today, and my children's book, Dancing with Your Lizard Brain, is for sale on Amazon.
Thank you for listening to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't. If you have enjoyed the show, please leave a rating and review on iTunes and help get the word out. To learn more or connect with Rhoda, visit therapyideas.net.